Hey, welcome to the briefing. What I'm going to cover with you today is this. Before you blame the provider, inspect the inbox load. I want to start with a quiet signal, not a dramatic one. A patient sends a portal message in the morning. They do not sound angry, they just sound unsure. They read the response from yesterday, but they still do not know what they are supposed to do next. So they send another message. That second message is easy to treat like more volume. Another item in the inbox, another thing waiting for the provider, another reason the day feels behind. But that second message may be telling you something more important. It may be telling you the first communication did not close the question. It may be telling you the work was routed but not resolved. It may be telling you the clinic is using the provider inbox as the place where unclear work goes to wait. That is the part I want you to pay attention to, because in healthcare operations, the provider inbox can look like a personal productivity problem when it is really showing you a live operating problem. The provider may be behind. That can be true, but the inbox may also be carrying refill confusion, portal message growth, prior authorization friction, patient access issues, staff uncertainty, result follow-up scheduling questions, and communication gaps that belong to more than one role. If you only see the provider attached to the inbox, you may assign the whole problem to the provider. That is a risky read. A clinic day can start clean enough. The schedule is full but known. The nurse knows the triage load. The medical assistants know the rooming plan. The front desk is handling check-in and phones. The provider knows there will be messages, but the inbox looks manageable. Then the day starts changing. One visit runs long because the patient brings up a new concern. Another visit needs extra documentation. A medication refill request arrives, but the pharmacy information is incomplete. A portal message asks a question that cannot be answered by the front desk. A prior authorization problem comes back. A lab result needs provider review. A patient calls because they did not understand yesterday's message. A staff member forwards a task because they are not sure whether it is clinical, administrative, or scheduling. By late morning, the inbox is no longer just a list of messages. It is a map of pressure. And if the leader still reads it as the provider needs to clear the inbox, the leader may miss what actually changed. That is the core of this briefing. The issue is not whether the provider has responsibility. The issue is whether the leader has an accurate read before assigning blame. This is where dynamic assessment matters. Dynamic assessment is the discipline of updating the read while the situation is still moving. It asks, what changed since the plan was made? What new pressure entered the system? What does that change now mean for ownership, routing, and capacity and patient communication? It is not a slow process. It is not a committee. It is not an excuse to delay action. It is the leadership habit of refusing to manage the current clinic with an outdated understanding. Let me put this into a clinic picture. Elena is a practice manager in an outpatient primary care clinic. She has 3 providers, 1 nurse, 4 medical assistants, 2 front desk staff members, and 1 referral coordinator. The clinic sees chronic disease follow-up, acute concerns, medication questions, lab review needs, annual visits, and same-day access issues. At 8 in the morning, the operating picture is tight but reasonable. The providers have full schedules. The nurse owns triage and follow-up calls. The medical assistants are assigned by provider. The front desk is handling phones, check-in, and scheduling questions. The referral coordinator is working referrals and prior authorization follow-up. Nobody thinks the day will be easy, but the plan matches the clinic. At 10:30, it does not. One provider is already 30 minutes behind because the first 2 visits took longer than expected. The nurse is pulled into a patient concern that cannot wait. One medical assistant is covering another pod because a staff member had to leave early. The front desk is answering repeat calls from patients who say they already sent messages. 2 refill requests arrive without enough information. A prior authorization issue comes back from the pharmacy. A lab result generates a provider review task. A patient sends a message asking whether they should stop a medication. Another patient sends a second message because the previous answer did not make sense to them. Now the provider inbox starts growing. The easy read is sitting right there. The provider is behind. Elena could walk over, point to the inbox, and tell the provider to check messages between visits. She could tell the team to stop sending unnecessary tasks. She could tell the front desk to reduce interruptions. She could tell the nurse to catch up. None of those reactions would sound unreasonable on the surface. But Elena has to ask a better question before she moves. What is actually landing in the inbox? That question changes the situation. Some of the inbox work requires provider judgment. Some requires nursing triage. Some requires missing information from the patient. Some is a refill process issue. Some is a front desk scheduling issue. Some is a front desk scheduling issue. Some is a repeat message because the first response did not answer the patient's real question. Some is sitting with the provider because nobody else is sure who owns it. That is not one problem. That is several work streams colliding in one visible place. This is where leaders get pulled into a narrow correction. A narrow correction says, clear the inbox faster. A better read says, the inbox is showing that the clinic's routing capacity and communication have shifted. That does not remove accountability. It makes accountability more accurate. If the provider owns the clinical decision, hold the provider accountable for the decision. If nursing owns triage, hold nursing accountable for triage. If the front desk owns scheduling, hold the front desk accountable for scheduling. If the medical assistant owns missing information before a refill can move, hold that role accountable for that part. But if the system has no clear owner, leadership owns the gap. That is the part a leader has to be mature enough to accept. Sometimes the person closest to the delay is not the source of the delay. Sometimes they are standing at the point where the system finally exposes itself. I have learned versions of that lesson through operations, not in a provider inbox, but in moving work under pressure. When information changes quickly, a leader can become too attached to the first clean explanation. It feels efficient. It gives you a target. It gives you something to correct. But if the explanation is incomplete, your correction can make the system look busier while leaving the real driver untouched. That is not leadership control. That is pressure redistribution. And healthcare teams already carry enough pressure. The provider inbox is especially dangerous because it feels objective. It has a count. It has timestamps. It has names. It has unanswered messages. It has patients waiting. It gives the leader something measurable. But measurement is not the same as understanding. A message count tells you volume. It does not tell you urgency. It does not tell you whether the item belongs to the provider. It does not tell you whether the patient understood the last answer. It does not tell you whether the front desk could have resolved a scheduling issue before it reached the inbox. It does not tell you whether the nurse lost the capacity that normally filters the issue. It does not tell you whether a task was forwarded because the owner was unclear. So if Elena only reads the count, she may make the wrong move with confidence. She may push the provider harder. The provider may stay late. The count may drop by the end of the day. The dashboard may look better tomorrow morning. But if the routing issue is still there, it returns. If the patient communication issue is still there, it returns. If the refill process issue is still there, it returns. If the nurse capacity issue is still there, it returns. If the team still forwards uncertainty into the provider inbox, it returns. That is the pattern that exhausts clinics. The team works hard, the inbox gets cleared, the same pressure comes back. Then leadership asks why people are not improving. Sometimes people are not improving. Sometimes that is the truth. But sometimes the visible person is being asked to absorb an operating problem that leadership has not fully named. That is the moment dynamic assessment is designed for. Now let's slow down on capacity because this is one of the biggest misses. Capacity is not just how many people are on the schedule. Capacity is what those people can realistically absorb under current conditions. You can have the same number of people in the clinic and still have less usable capacity. The nurse is present, but tied up with a patient concern. The provider is present, but behind in the schedule. The medical assistant is present, but covering another pod. The front desk is present, but stuck inside repeat calls. The referral coordinator is present, but focused on an urgent access problem. On paper, the staffing still exists. In reality, the clinic's useful capacity has moved. When capacity moves and the leader does not name it, work starts drifting. Tasks get forwarded instead of owned. Patients get passed back to the portal instead of getting a clear answer. The provider inbox becomes the default destination. The front desk repeats the same explanation. The nurse gets interrupted by issues that should have been clarified earlier. The medical assistants become the bridge between rooming pressure and message pressure. And then the provider looks like the bottleneck. Maybe the provider is part of the bottleneck. But the leader cannot know that from the count alone. The better question is, what capacity changed? And where did the work go because of it? That is not a soft question. It is an operating question. It helps the leader decide whether to adjust routing, protect provider review time, clarify ownership, redirect patient communication, or reset expectations before the end of the day. It keeps the leader from pretending the clinic is still operating under the morning plan. There is another signal I want you to respect: repeat contact. A repeat message is not always patient impatience. A repeat call is not always a patient ignoring instructions. A second portal message is not always unnecessary volume. Sometimes repeat contact means the patient did not understand the answer. Sometimes it means the answer was accurate but not actionable. Sometimes it means the message told the patient what the clinic thought but not what the patient should do next. Sometimes it means the communication channel was wrong. The patient needed a call, not another portal response. That matters because repeat contact feeds the inbox. A patient asks a question. The response is short. The patient is still unclear. The patient writes again. The front desk gets a call. The staff forwards the message. The provider sees another item. Now, the clinic calls it volume. But some of that volume was created by the failure to close the first communication. This is not clinical advice. This is operations. A communication loop that does not close will keep creating work. And if the only fix is answer faster, the clinic may answer faster and still generate repeat contact. Elena has to see that. She has to ask what messages are coming back and why. If the same type of question keeps returning, the issue may not be speed. It may be clarity. It may be routing. It may be patient understanding. It may be a missing next step. The inbox is not just holding work. It is giving feedback. A leader has to read the feedback. Now, let me be clear about the accountability side. Dynamic assessment should never become a way to avoid standards. That is not the point. If a provider is ignoring messages, address it. If staff members are forwarding tasks carelessly, address it. If the front desk is sending clinical issues without needed context, address it. If nursing triage is inconsistent, address it. If documentation is weak, address it. But address the right thing. Do not correct a provider for a routing failure. Do not correct a nurse for a capacity failure. Do not correct the front desk for a communication gap they did not create. Do not correct the medical assistant for unclear ownership that leadership never defined. Accurate accountability requires an accurate read. That is the discipline. A leader who reads the situation well can say, this piece belongs to the provider, this piece belongs to nursing, this piece belongs to the front desk, this piece belongs to the medical assistant, and this piece belongs to leadership because the workflow does not define ownership clearly enough. That last sentence is where some leaders struggle, because it is easier to push down than to own the design gap. It is easier to say the provider needs to keep up than to admit that the provider inbox has become the holding area for work nobody else knows how to own. It is easier to say the team needs better communication than to inspect whether the clinic has clear routing rules under pressure. But easier is not the standard. Accurate is the standard. Healthcare operations require accuracy because the consequences do not stay inside a spreadsheet. They reach patients, they affect staff, they affect provider focus. They affect after-hours work. They affect patient experience. They affect trust. That is why the read matters. And so what should Elena do in the moment? Not a full redesign, not a lecture, not a dramatic reset. She needs a current read. First, she names what changed. The nurse is tied up. The provider is behind. One medical assistant is covering another pod. Repeat calls are rising. Refill requests are incomplete. The inbox is receiving mixed work. Second, she separates the inbox types: provider judgment, nursing triage, refill information, scheduling, prior authorization, repeat patient communication, staff uncertainty. Third, she checks routing. What should reach the provider right now? What needs nursing first? What needs front desk action? What needs missing information before it becomes provider work? What is being forwarded because nobody knows the owner? Fourth, she checks capacity. Who lost time? Who is covering extra work? Who is being interrupted? Who needs protection for the next 2 hours? Who needs a clear boundary? Fifth, she decides what needs to shift before the day gets away. Maybe refill requests missing information go back through a defined front-end check. Maybe the nurse gets protected for a short triage block. Maybe one medical assistant owns clarification for a set of messages. Maybe the provider gets a short protected review window instead of being expected to clear messages between every room. Maybe repeat patient messages get handled by call when the portal has already failed once. Notice what this does. It does not make the day easy. It makes the day clearer. That is all leadership can promise sometimes, not ease, clarity. And clarity changes execution. I want you to think about your own environment now. Where do you have an inbox, queue, work list, dashboard, or channel that looks like the problem, but may actually be the place where other problems collect? Maybe it is a provider inbox. Maybe it is a call queue. Maybe it is a referral work list. Maybe it is a scheduling queue. Maybe it is a patient access broad. Maybe it is an EHR task pool. Maybe it is a shared email box. Maybe it is a supervisor's phone that never stops ringing. Whatever it is, ask this: is this the source or is this the collection point? That question is powerful. A collection point gathers unresolved work from other parts of the system. If you treat the collection point as the source, you will pressure the person standing near it. You may get movement. You may get temporary relief, but you will not get control. To get control, you have to inspect what the collection point is collecting. What work belongs there? What work does not? What work is unclear? What work is repeating? What work lacks ownership? What work lacks enough information to move? What work is urgent? What work is only loud? That is the read. That is what separates a leader who reacts to the cue from a leader who understands the operating condition behind it. Here are the warning signs I would watch in this provider inbox problem. The first warning sign is default routing. If staff members are unsure where something belongs and the safest answer is always send it to the provider, the inbox will become a holding area. The second warning sign is repeat patient contact. If patients keep asking again, the first communication may not be closing the issue. The third warning sign is forwarding without ownership. Forwarding a task is movement. It is not closure. If nobody owns the next action, the work is still loose. The fourth warning sign is disappearing admin time. If the provider's review time gets consumed by longer visits, interruptions, or schedule pressure, the inbox plan has changed whether anyone says it out loud or not. The fifth warning sign is urgency collapse. That is when everything feels urgent because the team has stopped sorting work by risk, owner, and next action. When those signs show up, the leader should not wait until the end of the day to learn the lesson. The lesson is already present. The inbox is telling the leader the operating picture has changed. Now, where does CSA fit into this? CSA is the read. It asks what is happening and what matters, not what is loud, not what is irritating, not what is easiest to blame, what is actually happening. Dynamic assessment is the part of that read that stays alive. It is the update. It says the plan made sense earlier, but does it still match the current condition? That is a practical leadership control. It keeps you from stale certainty. Stale certainty is when your original read was good enough at one point, but it is no longer current. You are still confident, but your confidence is outdated. That is dangerous in healthcare operations because the clinic does not stay still. Schedules slip, patient concerns change, portal messages arrive, staff capacity moves, results post, refill issues return, prior authorizations block access, patients call again. The work keeps moving, so the read has to keep updating. Dynamic assessment does not mean changing direction every 5 minutes. That would create chaos. It means checking whether the current plan still matches the current clinic. If it does, hold the plan. If it does not, adjust the part that no longer fits. That is disciplined adaptability. Let me give you the practical version. When the provider inbox starts building, ask 5 questions before you blame. 1, what changed since the day started? 2, what type of work is increasing? 3, what is urgent and what is only visible? 4, what role lost capacity? 5, what work is sitting with the wrong owner? Those 5 questions do not solve the whole system. They improve the read, and a better read creates better action. Maybe the answer is that the provider needs a protected review block. Maybe the answer is that nursing needs to triage a category before it reaches the provider. Maybe the answer is that the front desk needs clearer scripting for repeat calls. Maybe the answer is that refill requests missing information need to be clarified before provider review. Maybe the answer is that portal responses need to include a clearer next step. Maybe the answer is that certain tasks should never go directly to the provider without a defined minimum information set. Those are better decisions because they are tied to the driver, not because they are softer, because they are more accurate. The final point is this. The provider inbox is easy to blame because it is visible. It has numbers, it has names, it has timestamps, it has patient messages, it has staff frustration attached to it. It gives the leader something to point at. But visible pressure is not always the source. Sometimes the inbox is showing that the clinic changed and nobody updated the operating read. The schedule changed, the staffing changed, the message load changed, the routing demand changed, the patient communication load changed, the provider's available time changed, the plan stayed the same, and that is the failure point. When that happens, the right move is not to blame faster, the right move is to read better. Inspect the inbox load. Find what changed. Find what is being routed incorrectly. Find where capacity moved. Find where patient communication is creating repeat contact. Find where the old plan no longer matches the current clinic. Then act. Dynamic assessment is not reacting harder. It is updating the read faster. And in healthcare, that kind of read protects more than productivity. It protects patient communication. It protects the team. It protects provider focus. It protects execution. It protects the leader from turning a real operating signal into a simple blame problem. Do not blame the provider first. Inspect the inbox load, update the read, then move with control. Thanks for listening to the briefing.